Everybody talks about critical thinking being important in life, in college. I'm going to argue that it's also one of the most fundamental and little discussed parts uh, of public speaking, of what we are looking for, hoping for in the see if I can get this sit a little bit better. What we're hoping for when somebody gives us a talk. And everyone says it's important and it's good, but I don't think we're very clear or specific or strategic about what's really involved. And that's why I've assigned this chapter from Jerry Nosich's book. I think it's a useful and systematic um, help, a tool. It's a tool. I think it's a really good tool, a thinking tool. And maybe it's a really good speech preparation tool. And maybe it's an especially good speech preparation tool when we're thinking about challenging things, controversies, personal, big questions. Let's take a little time to go through the tool. Nosich says that critical thinking has two big elements. One, it's reflective. It's thinking about thinking. It has this other level. Sometimes we use the word metacognition. We don't just think, we think about it as a process, as steps. And the other thing he says, what's he called? I think he says it's rigorous. It has some challenging rigor. And he offers this wonderful little circle as a set of questions, of step by step ways of considering a big issue or a question that really help open it up and help us be much more careful about what's there and what might be involved. And you have it in your text. I put it up here on the board. But the elements quickly, he has 8 of them. And he wants us to think about the question at issue, assumptions that we have, the consequences of the issue and of our reflection, what information we need, concepts that might be involved, conclusions that we can draw, different points of view, and the purpose of the inquiry. So those are kind of lofty, abstract labels, but I think it really becomes useful if we take an example. And so your discussion board this week, I'm asking you to both think about big questions that are personal questions, like life questions, that might be worth critical inquiry or critical thinking through, or we need to think through. Also to think about controversies that we're facing, and there's lots of them. So those are listed in the assignment, and I'd like you to pick a personal big issue and a controversy. And I don't want you to think them through yet. I just want you to say, oh, I think this would be worth my attention, or this needs my attention. I'll give you an example that was an issue for me in my own life, was whether or not to marry Peter. Peter's my partner. And obviously, Peter Kirk, we're gay. So we're a same-sex couple, and we've been together for a long time. We've been together 20 years, and we've been together longer than we had the privilege or the possibility of marriage. But let's go say, should I marry Peter? All right, what's the question? Well, the question's very clear. Should we get married? It's a personal question, and many of you will have the question. You may have a significant other, and you might be living with them and have a lovely relationship. Should you marry him or not? Why not? Should marriage be for my soon-to-be in-laws? They didn't want Smart Son and Penny to move in together. They thought that marriage is a precondition for cohabitation. They're kind of conservative out there in Alaska in this family. So marriage. Okay, what are the assumptions that we have about marriage? Well, that it's about love, that it's serious, that marriage is that it's a public status or statement. This is my spouse. This is my husband. This is my wife. That it's about sharing a life. So it's about building a family. Marriage is certainly in heterosexual couples. Well, actually now in all couples, but in the traditional, in the traditional scheme, marriage was really about family. A man married a woman, and they made babies, and they built their family, and that was a big part of it. Was family making, baby making. It didn't used to be that same-sex couples could make families, but we do. In fact, I came to this relationship with 3 kids already, so I'd already made some babies with my previous spouse. So okay, but it's about making family. What are the consequences of marriage? What happens? Well, sometimes our families get involved in our personal, and sometimes they become aware of our erotic, our sexual relationship. Most people who are married are in a physical sexual relationship, and their families are involved. It's actually a very politely way of saying we're doing it. That's accepted, and it's okay, and it's celebrated. When we're married, our eroticism is celebrated. When we're not married, people get weird, and in the very traditional understandings of bodies and eroticism and sexuality. So families are involved. Well, a consequence for us, is all of this legal stuff happens when I marry this man. Not the least of which is we get health insurance. I can marry. I can put my spouse on my health insurance, which is a lot of money and a lot of things. A consequence of marriage, there's a financial consequence. Above and beyond living together, most married families, most married couples, somehow their finances merge. That's an assumption. It doesn't always have to be that way, but it usually is. We become one, and financial wealth is part of that oneness. I support my spouse supports me. What are the concepts that are involved in marriage? Well, the concept of love, the concept of fidelity, faithful fidelity, at least having a shared contract. There are open marriages, there are polyamorous marriages, but somehow this concept of commitment, the concept of lifelong. All marriages don't last forever, but we intend them to. We don't marry for a while. When we enter a marriage, we think we're going to do it forever. It doesn't always turn out that way, but this longevity, living together, the concept of sharing, the concept of celebrations in marriages and families. We have celebrations together, Christmas and Easter and Hanukkah and Passover. What's the purpose of marriage? Well, the purpose would be to show our commitment, to change our status from dating or partnership to being together. The purpose is to stop the testing and stop the tryout and really commit. The purpose in many marriages is to build a family or to make babies. What are points of view? Well, there's my point of view, there's my partner's point of view, Peter, but there's also the point of view of our kids. Did they like him enough to have a stepdad instead of just dad's Peter? There's the issue of my kid's mom. not that we're divorced, but does she have any, certainly a point of view? She's going to have feelings or awareness or interest. There's the perspective of my parents, although they're now deceased, but my siblings, his extended family. I have a network of very, very close friends here in New Haven and Connecticut who are, my best friends, like my brother, people that really care about us. What do they think of this relationship? What do they think of this dude? Is he good enough for me? Is it a good match? They all have opinions about this, evidently. So, okay, purpose of marriage. Question at issue, assumptions that we have, consequences that we have, information that we need. Well, what's the deal with same sex? But there's points of view. There's also the point of view of my church. You guys know that my dad was a pastor. I'm active in a Christian church community, a Presbyterian church. They bless, they understand the church. My church understands marriage as a covenant relationship. So it's not just about me and him. It's not just about the law and us. It also involves God. It involves the Holy Spirit who blesses and participates and makes sacred this union. So the church has something to say about marriage. My church, my faith tradition, celebrates same-sex marriages, but only recently. And maybe harder for some of the older folks, although I guess I'm an older folk now. That's a point of view. Peter's Jewish. What do Jews say? He's not really super observant Jewish. He's like bagel and matzo ball soup Jewish, as opposed to reading the Torah every day. But that's a point of view. His cultural tradition, his spiritual tradition. We're going to have this issue. How do we deal with the holidays in a multi-religious family? Does one win? Does the other win? Do we celebrate all of them? Do we celebrate none of them? Those are points of view that participate when two people of different religious or cultural backgrounds get together. Okay, what information do I need? How much does it cost? Where could I do it? Who would marry us and how? How will we celebrate? Are we going to have a party? Are we going to have a quiet commitment ceremony? What is the financial consequences of our marriage? How does he feel about my kids, our family? Those are all issues. Will he accept his role as a parent? What is that role? How does he understand that in light of the fact that he didn't give birth to the kids, but he's known them since they were like 5 and 6. So that's all about the information. Then what conclusions can we draw? What interpretations or conclusions are there about marriage? Well, it's a good thing. There's a lot of positives. Are there any? So here is, I could go on, and you'll notice that as I go through the elements, that some things sort of seem to repeat, or they play in both sides, or they see, and that's really when we're really thinking through something. We notice that we could turn this again and again and again, refining each of these elements. But one of the things that I guess so after we've done this, it's some things have shown up about this issue that really weren't first apparent. Some of the things about our different religions, I hadn't really thought about that. This issue, the concepts, faithfulness, contract, lifelong. Are the contracts in same-sex couples, should they be the same as in heterosexual couples? What about monogamy? What about open marriages? What about, do we have to be, people have all kinds of relationships these days. What will we choose? How will our community? We talked about our church community, but what about the gay community? How do they respond? Are they pro-marriage or against marriage? Has that changed? You know, are there politics involved in marriage? As I'm thinking through these things, these are little aspects that I don't always think about. Sure, health insurance is a really big deal. You know, the other, I guess, information that everybody has to have is that, you know, what's it mean to get married, you know, after 20 years? We've been together 20 years. Why do we need to get married? Well, this helps us bring out. Now, the truth of the matter is that we are married. We got married about 5 or 10 years ago but primarily when we made the decision, all this other stuff had been resolved. We were living together. We had a house together. He's a wonderful co-parent. You know, we were living as a married couple, but with none of the legal protections. So, you know, when one of us gets sick, when we got married, we suddenly became next of kin, which, man, given COVID, I'm really glad. Can you imagine if you were with somebody, you lived with them, you shared a life, and someone got sick and you were not allowed in the hospital? Like, marriage legally makes us next of kin. And without marriage, you're not. The mother or the brother or somebody else is. Now, I don't think most hospitals would ever take issue with that. But, you know, it's in my lifetime that people have been excluded from hospitals because they might have been the same-sex lover, but the family didn't approve or didn't recognize. So there are larger, even with an issue that's even like an issue like this, there's some very consequential dimensions that we don't think about enough until we think carefully through the whole thing. So here's an example of the use of Nosic's critical thinking circle. I think it's a wonderful tool. I think it's useful to read the whole chapter too, but if you're not, I want you to especially look at these elements. They're tricky. They're not self-evident. It takes a little while to get a sense of what we mean when we that. But we're going to be practicing using this. I think it's a wonderful tool, both as you guys are. Think about how useful it would be in terms of choosing a major. Or think about, should you move or not? Should you quit your job and take another job? It's a really, rather than just saying, oh, I'll do what I feel. Well, that's a pretty bad strategy most of the time. Doing what we feel, it turns out, often leads us into really bad decision making for all kinds of interesting reasons. So it doesn't mean that we don't get a gut sense that helps at some point, but real issues are more complex than my first impulse or my first gut response. I find that my gut and my head need to go together. That when I'm really careful to think things through, my gut changes and gives me some signal. Okay, yes, now maybe I don't even change the decision, but I have a better understanding of why, of how this is consistent with our values. So, you know, when Peter and I got married, we did it very quietly. We'd been together so long that we didn't want to make a big hullabaloo about it. But later we found out that was really, some of my friends were really upset. They really wanted to have a celebration. Maybe we'll have a big anniversary party someday to fix that wrong. You know, some of our dear friends felt a little left out. But okay, that's our story, my life. So those are personal issues. And then I think there's some really consequential issues. This is a great way to think about Black Lives Matter, Blue Lives Matter, All Lives Matter, Me Too movement. We think about these larger issues. I'm really curious about what you guys think is important enough. What issues are bubbling up in your lives in this highly politicized environment that you think you would benefit from this kind of careful examination? That it would be worth the work, the 30 minutes or the 90 minutes or the conversation together to get a better sense of how you're positioned, how you might act, how you might teach and learn about issues of consequence, the big stuff, the stuff that adult, grown-up citizens really have to deal with, and that our work in college, our work together, all this work of learning, of understanding, of getting new information is really of great benefit. You know, we go to college, sure, because the credential helps us get jobs, but we also I want to celebrate how important this work of developing your thinking skills. It's making you more powerful people, making you wiser at home, making you more resourceful as you move through these complex issues of building a career and balancing a family and finding happiness and joy and purpose in the way that you're living your life, instead of like boredom and victimhood and want. That's one of the huge payoffs of our work together. So you guys know that you're doing it. This is such a hard semester for us. This online stuff is so challenging, but please know what you're doing matters. It's so important and it has payoff. Sometimes we don't see it right away, but when you're fighting to make time for our class, when you're fighting in all your other classes, remember to tell your people, your parents, your lovers, your friends, your kids, that what you're doing has great, great import for you, for them, and for us all together. I am so proud of you guys for hanging in the way you're doing. Keep it up.